episode 10, the Straight Talking Podcast. Jenni, very welcome.
Thanks.
Jenni Loftus is an adolescent psychotherapist, has her own business in Blanchardstown. So, Jenni, I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions about yourself. First of all, whereabouts in Dublin are you from?
So I'm from Mofew in Coolock. Grew up there in the 80s. My ma was a lone parent, so me and my sister grew up in the 80s during a recession. It was, I guess, a tough upbringing, but I was watching Philly McMahon on your podcast, and he was talking about like the poshy wall. And for us in Mofew, there was a huge difference between Mofew and Clunshock, and all that divided that was, I guess, a church and a few shops. I think for me growing up there, I was very much aware of the difference in social class. Like I grew up in a corporation estate. There was a lot of unemployment, a lot of addiction. But I remember growing up there as always, it was always sunny. We were always out playing. Everyone was kind of good to each other. Like the neighbours would look after each other. You know, you could knock into Evelyn for a cup of sugar or a bottle of milk or bread. So I guess there was a huge social divide, but that we grew up and that was kind of normal for us. So that's where I grew up.
I love the stories you have about your ma, Sue. I'm after getting a chance of that.
Yeah.
Somebody knocking around the door selling something and they're getting a chance of that.
Yeah, there was always a chance of something going. Fell off the back of a truck. And I think that was the way people
Survival.
lived, and that you afforded things, that you know, someone got a chance of something and that's how it was. So nobody looked down on that, I think, because everybody was in the same boat. Like, you know, there wasn't a lot of money going around, so yeah, people looked after each other, and if you happened to get a chance of something, well then it was good.
And how you went to school? How did you find school? How did you find like primary school? You went locally in Coolock.
Yeah, I went to St. Francis School. I guess in primary I would have been okay. Like I would have been grand. Not overly smart, just kind of got along. School was okay in primary. I think for me it was when I went to secondary school that I would have noticed the change in me and how I was. But growing up in Mofew, going to St. Francis, it was grand. It was full of kids from the poshy area. It was full of kids from Mofew. There was a large traveller community that was in school. So it was quite diverse, I guess, back then. Like there was loads of different types of people. So primary school was actually, it was okay.
And it's funny, like, I suppose where I'm from, it's I'd never come across this type of stuff, but you went to St. Francis School and like Yvonne's niece goes to St. Francis School, and I think in the past like 2 years she couldn't go to school because there's been 3 people murdered within the vicinity of St. Francis, so the whole area was cordoned off. Like, so it's only, that area is only getting kind of more violent and that type of stuff happening compared to when you were growing up. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do think that when we were growing up, like drugs wasn't as widely used as they are now. I think like late 90s, early 2000s, like there was a huge influx of heroin. There was rob cars, like that was your entertainment, like rob cars be flying around and we'd all follow them and it'd be like deadly. I do think that, I guess, people who were in addiction and they then have children and those children are growing up with parents who are in addiction, I guess they don't have the safety of a house to grow up in where there's people saying like do this, do that. And I do think that as time has gone on, the problems have gotten worse.
Yeah. And then moving on, then you done your leaving cert.
Yeah.
And then after your leaving,
I'm laughing because I did really shit, barely scraped by. Didn't think I'd pass it all, and I know me and Yvonne would laugh, or you would laugh at us in that, saying that I did like bouncy maths or cabbage maths or foundation maths in school, and that is like, why would you even bother doing it? Like, it's
Rubber
easy.
desk.
So I wasn't academic at all in school. Did me leaving, barely passed it, but passed.
And I think what we're going to go on, the story we're going to go on to, because this is what I suppose we're groomed, and we look at society now as you have to do this, this, and this to be successful. But like your story and of the other people that I find interesting and I like to speak to is, life doesn't work out like that, but you can still go from X to Y where you want to be through different avenues and not in that set pattern that is recommended by society to do.
Like, I think me, because I can only speak for me, so growing up in a single parent household, being really aware of a social class, feeling quite different to everybody else. Like now, when I was if I was a teenager now, I definitely would have been diagnosed with depression, anxiety disorder, all of those things. Like, I came from an area where people don't generally, they're not like pushed up, you know, and there's this kind of mentality sometimes if you see someone doing well, it's almost like, oh, look at them trying, you know, getting above their station almost. And I think in areas where there's huge poverty and addiction, you're kind of ingrained in that. You don't really think that there's a different way for you. And I would have subscribed to that. I would have felt like, yeah, this is my life, this is where it's going. And I guess my journey was, I met somebody, had a kid, broke up with them, went to college, then got married, and then got the house. So I did everything, I guess society would say, arse ways, but it's worked out for me.
Yeah. And I suppose we're going to talk about, you would have been one of the first out of your family to go to college.
Yeah.
Okay. And well, how did you find that from, like, with regard to your family? Sometimes families can be, look, as you just said, look at her getting above our station. Us type of people don't do things like that. Do you know what I mean? So how did you find, what was that dynamic like?
I don't think it was really about going to college. I think it was what I chose to study. So like going to college, they would have been really supportive, and it's like, oh, great. And they probably wouldn't have said that to me. And again, like, my family have this mentality where they wouldn't tell you, but they tell everyone else.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, so what, you're going to college, but to the neighbours, it's like, oh, see, my Jenny is doing X, Y, and Z. So this piece of not really bigging you up to your face, but my mum would
being proud, being super
like,
proud.
She'd tell the neighbours. And I think there's an element that, like, for all of us who are parents, like, I think we all want our kids to do well. Like, you know, every one of us wakes up every morning and it's like, I want them to be happy. I want them to be okay. So it wasn't about necessarily going to college. It was more what I chose to study. And I think there's still a bit of a stigma around counselling and psychotherapy. It's like, oh, why would you do that, getting into people's heads, you big weirdo? You know, like, there's that mentality. So it wasn't so much about the college. It was more what I chose to study. Which
is psychotherapy.
Yeah.
And you have your own business now.
I do.
Which is
Thanks a million.
It's great. No, it's fantastic. And you worked in PA the house as well.
Yeah,
which
7 years.
Brilliant, which is great. And I suppose we're going to start talking about, like, teenagers, you know, and I put out a thing looking for a few questions, and a few people messaged me, and I suppose Jenny has been a great hand to me and Yvonne, stopping Max strangling me sometimes, or questions we have. Do you know what I mean? Because, like, I'm a parent, and if anyone thinks I have it together, I don't have it together. No one has it together. Everyone's winging it.
And I think, just to say as well, I'm also a parent, and just because I'm a therapist, I don't have it together either. Like, I'm not sitting here saying, like, I've all the answers and I know everything. I don't.
Yeah.
Like, some days with my daughter, like, things are grand, and then other days, like the other day, I had a fight with her because she didn't cut the dog's nails. Like, I came in, the dog was like doing river dance on the floor, you know, and their nails get long. It's like, fuck's sake, did you not cut them? And then it's like, that was just because I was having a shit day.
Yeah.
So I'm not sitting here, you know, saying like I'm holier than thou and I have all the answers. I don't. I just have a certain set of skills that maybe might be helpful to people.
Yeah.
And I forget to use them sometimes on myself.
100%. And I suppose we'll talk about teenagers and talk about what they face today and stuff like that. And I'm not going to ask you specifics, but most of the parents that come to you would have a similar type of disconnect of what you just spoke to with their kids, and with what society is prescribing them, and then maybe getting triggered by other parents that are looking around going, Jesus, she's studying and she's doing this and she's doing that. Do you find that type of mentality is what you face with kids a lot? Like parents with unrealistic expectations upon their kids?
Yes and no. Like, I think for all of us, like, we wake up every day and you want, you know, you go to work and you pay the bills and you want your kids to be okay. I think there's this element with social media and Facebook and Instagram. People are putting up stuff and everything's happy and everything's great. And you might be coming home from work. And I describe this scene all the time to clients, and people listening might identify with it, that, you know, when your kid starts to come online as an adolescent, so about, say, 11, 12, and they might be in secondary school and they come home, or they're training, and they come home from school, they fuck the school bag in the hall. And the mum or dad says, no, hey, like, what's wrong, hon? Nothing. And the parents kind of going, okay. And it's like, are you sure there's nothing wrong? I said there's nothing wrong. And the ma's like going, cheeky little shit, like, who do you think you're talking to? Why are you talking to me like that? I'm not talking to you like that. Shut up and leave me alone. And the kid like storms up the stairs and the ma runs up after him, and it's like, who do you think you are? I'm sick of you disrespecting this house. And I think that goes on a lot. And before
that never happens in this house.
Before you know it, like, there's killings. And I think what happens with that is that the adolescent's in their room feeling shit. The mum or dad's downstairs saying, like, what am I doing wrong? Like, I don't know what's going on. And in my experience, this is just part of adolescent development. Like, this is what's happening in terms of the adolescent's brain. And I don't want to be all, like, you know, technical, but they're coming online about 11 or 12, and they're moving from one part of their brain, which is called the amygdala at the back, bear with me. And this is to do with feelings and emotions. And they're moving into the frontal cortex, which is where we operate from. And that's to do with decision making and planning sexual behaviour. So parents might also recognise this scenario, like your kid's in school, comes home, says, I'm after getting a talk today about, you know, business studies. I'm kind of thinking of, I might do business studies and, you know, I could set up my own business. And the parents are like, oh, savage, like, they kind of seem to be getting a hold of themselves. 5 minutes later, you hear a roar from the sitting room and he's digging the head off his 8-year-old brother over a remote control off a PlayStation. And the parents are like going, like, what's the story with him or her? Like, I've only one, so my experience might be she's all delighted with life, things are going well, I think she has a handle on it. And then 5 minutes later, she's kicking off in the kitchen because there's no Coca noodles. And you're kind of going, okay, but this is what I've learned, that's to do with brain development and where they're at and where they're moving from. And I think a lot of parents really take that personal, and it's like they're trying to get at me, they don't understand. And the teenager is also feeling like they don't get me. So you've got two people now that are kind of living in the house going, what's going on? And I think when I explain that to parents and talk about it, it's like, because you're even nodding going, oh my God, yeah, I get that. Yeah. And there's something about even getting that. It's like, okay, so it's really not about them or you. It's in terms of developmentally, this is what's going on with them.
And I suppose sometimes speaking from your own experience, it's like when I have two boys and two of them can be similar, when they behave like that and bleed and storm up into their rooms, like, instead of going, Jeez, I wonder what's going on for them, or you turn it inwards going, well, I didn't do anything. What's this all about? Do you know what I mean?
They're being disrespectful. I'm out working my arse off. They're like being really ungrateful. Do they know? And like some days, if you've had a really bad day and you come in and the kids are behaving like that, you're going to react. It's just, it's a natural part of being human. Whereas I think adolescents, like, there's 3 stages, and the first stage is, as I said, about 11 or 12, and they're about, like, they're the centre of the universe. Or you'll be at traffic lights and you see 14 or 15-year-olds sauntering across the road and you're like, will you move? Like, but it's like they're the centre of the universe and everything's around them. Middle adolescents are kind of more, they go inwards. So they'd be kind of thinking, what's wrong with me? What's going on? Where am I going? Sort of having like an existential crisis. And then late adolescence is about going to college, getting a job, sorting your shit out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And then I suppose looking like kids are staying and teenagers are staying longer and longer and longer now at home compared to what they used to do years ago. So them issues can become magnified now because they can't afford a house. You know what I mean? They are deciding to do what they want to do longer. So kind of some parents are stuck with that going into the 20s nowadays, whereas years ago people got married kind of early or done whatever, you know, done whatever they were going to do. So advice for parents that are kind of struggling with that at the moment, that they have like this hormonal teen that's bleeding in their room morning, noon and night, plates everywhere, cups everywhere, just being, what would you say to them? What advice would you give them?
I just say, ignore it.
Yeah.
It's really hard. Like, I get that piece, like that's their space. Like, the number one thing that people would come to me with is about mobile phone usage, and they're just say filthy animals. But just really messy. And I would be like, okay, like just try and take that with a pinch of salt. So it's like they're not doing that on purpose. Like, in terms of brain development as well, there's no urgency around adolescents. Like, you'd ask them to empty the dishwasher, 5 hours later you're like, what's start? Oh, seriously, like, you know, they're very much involved in their own stuff. And I think there's a lot of parents, we really take that personal, and it's about they're disrespecting us, and it's not about that. Developmentally, this is kind of where they're meant to be at. So developmentally they're actually all right. It's just that we want them to keep the room tidy, and we want them to do the things that we want them to do, and they don't do it. And when they don't comply, you get into a power struggle, and you have a teenager digging their heels in, and then you're digging your heels in, and it just causes chaos. I think how to deal with adolescents would be have a conversation with them, get them to look at like consequences, try and involve them more. Like, you know, with younger kids taking stuff off them, like if you don't do that, I'm taking your computer. And they're like, okay. Well, adolescents, like if you don't do that and taking your phone, it's a whole different ballgame. Are you really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, a good luck with that, because you just, it's like this is their whole world, and you're coming in and you're trying to take that away from them, and it just it breeds like frustration on your part as the parent, frustration on the part of the adolescent. So I would say let them stay in their own mess. It's going to start smelling after a while.
It's funny,
but it's really hard though. I get that that's really hard.
It's funny, I suppose. That conversation, like it's I have one teenager, never had a teenager before, but like you go in and it's like good night, it's like ring forted with glasses, cups, plates all around the PlayStation, and had a good night, leading flat out. There's just, I suppose, and then I remember us talking to my ma, you know, going, jeez, this is played not on, and my ma going, what? Do you have a short memory? I used to be flat out on PlayStation 1, cups, plates everywhere. So I suppose, as you say, it's a natural progression. But then with the phone use with teenagers, we had a party and we loaded teenagers, Gansey loaded them over. And I remember being at parties at that age, and every single one of them, like I was looking, myself and Yvonne were laughing at, like, this bloke was trying to chat up this young one. You know, we stayed in the house because we were supervising, and like she's talking to him, but she's also texting on her phone while she's talking to him. It's like, fucking hell. It's just mad. I just think, like, they're dancing, the phones are out, they're talking to each other, the phones are out. Like, the phones are like a barrier. But parents think that teenagers are just like that with their phone, with them. But they're like that with everyone.
But rather than looking at it as it's a barrier, it's almost like an extension of their being. Yeah. Like, everything happens around the phone. Like, that's how they communicate. Like years ago, like I don't think I got my first phone, I'm showing my age now, till I was probably 18 or 19. Yeah, probably 19. And before that, like if you were to meet somebody, it was like you had to show up at the exact time. If you were to organise stuff, you have to be there. Having a best friend growing up, like I would have spoken to my best friend all day, every day if I could, but you had to stop because you had no phones. And I think how they communicate now is very different, and I think it's very difficult because that wasn't my lived experience as an adolescent. So now looking at, like, half the time all I see is the top of my teenager's head because she's like this, and it's like laughing and binging, you know, like Snapchat, like it's just constantly going, and you're like, Jesus, like I didn't have that. So it's kind of hard for me to wrap my head around that as a parent. But I think for a lot of them, it's rather than looking at as a barrier, it's more of an extension of their like lived experience in the world.
It's a mad one. Like even taking it back to myself a little, as what you were saying, like I used to, like, you'd meet aboard in the Harp and you'd arrange then the next Saturday, if you liked that, to meet her under bleeding Cleary's clock. And if you were late for it, yeah, bleeding late. Imagine being standing here like a tick. Whereas like younger people will listen to that go, what?
But even
how did you arrange that? That there was no like, I'm running late, see it in 5, because there was no phones. But you physically picked up a phone in your gaff, rang someone, arranged to meet them, and just hoped that they were going to turn up. That's how it was done.
Or in Mofew, we had a pay phone, so you had to have the right amount of change to put in. And that even is an alien concept. It's like, what? That's weird.
That's a max to say, like, fucking weird.
Yeah, but the landscape with how they communicate even is different. Like the language around, like they talk to people online now, and it's kind of like they're seeing people, and like it's just what? And they could be talking to a few people, and then it's exclusive. You're just talking to one, and then you meet someone. It's kind of mind-boggling for me because I didn't have that. Like you said, it's like I'll meet you at the wall, or I'll meet you in the Prizewood Park, or you know, and you had to be there. Whereas their experience is very different to ours, and as parents as well, sometimes, as much as the adolescent is looking at us going weirdos, we're kind of looking at them as well going weirdos. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I was even like, you know, and I suppose how people use that then, like, conversation is harder now, because I suppose when we were adolescents, or like you spoke to people and you learned how to talk to people, whereas I find some adolescents that I know, their view of starting a conversation is, look what I seen online. Your man fell off a skateboard and snapped his leg in two. It's gas. Check it out. That's how they start to come. It's like, different.
For, I don't know if you remember being an adolescent. I know for me, I was naturally quite shy and insecure, and I wouldn't have talked to a lot of people. And I think naturally adolescents like me and you were sitting here looking at each other in the face. And when I'm in therapy with adolescents, that's really exposing for adolescents. It's almost like, what are you staring at me for? Yeah. Stop looking at me like you weirdo. Yeah. So it's like they're not able to tolerate this level of, I suppose it's quite intimate when you look at somebody not in that way, but you know what I mean?
To talk to them,
and I think adolescents, naturally, they can't cope with that. So there's a lot of like, they do have their head down and they walk like this and they're on their phones. And I think, again, part of that can be because they can't tolerate that, you know, you looking at them. And we say to them, will you look at me when I'm talking to you? And they're like, more, you know, that real...
They go inwards even more.
And it's really... God loved them, like it's so cringy for them. And I think, again, we always come from our own perspective, from how we are in the world. And I guess most of us have had really shaming experience in adolescence. Like, I could ask you to think of a time in your adolescence that made you cringe, and you're just like, yeah, shut up, I'm not going there.
How many of them?
Yeah, exactly.
How many of them
and
do you want to
for
hear
us
about?
As well, like, we didn't have social media. Like, thank God, like the things that I know for me as an adolescent, I was quite impulsive. There's two types of adolescents, really impulsive, who are the ones that rob shopping trolleys and push them down the stairs and think it's gas crack, and you have other ones who are naturally inhibitive, so they'd be really kind of inward, naturally shy. But yeah, I think it's very difficult. I know I'm probably on the side of adolescents, but I kind of feel really sorry for them sometimes.
Yeah, no, like with my adolescence, if like you've said that to me before, and I've learned that from you, is sometimes when they're not in the humour of talking, like, and they're side on in the car, not looking at you, that's the best time. They just won't shut up talking to you. Or I find as well, at night time, they'll bounce in and lie down beside you and tell you everything.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Whereas when you're like, what did you do today? Nothing. You know what I mean? They
And
just won't
sometimes
talk.
they're like,
Nothing.
they're ready for a fight as well.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
But I do think like it's called sidewards contact, works really well. And even for me with my own adolescents, like we have good conversations in the car because it's less exposing and you can just chat. And as you said, sometimes at night when they lie down beside you, and I think though sometimes for parents there's this piece of like, oh my God, like they're giving me something, and the urge is to try and get everything out of them, where it's to just take it at their pace.
No, it's myself and Yvonne have communicated with you a lot, and we found out a lot for you. We also read what's your woman's name, Dr. Shelfie. Do you ever come across her? No. She's another one that's like with adolescents, it's like teaching them to drive. So you're letting them drive the car, they've the brake, the gears, everything, and every now and again you're going, give me that, you fucking idiot, and you grab the steering wheel. You know what I mean? That's what it's like having an adolescent, you know.
And it's, I guess, like when you think of it, like for, if I can use Max as an example, I hope that's okay. Sorry, Max.
Yeah.
But Max is naturally quite big. Like when I hadn't seen him for a while, and he rocked down to the kitchen one day, and I was like, he looks like a man. So it's very hard when you're looking at him not to expect a certain behaviour from him. Like you're looking at him, he looks like a man, he shows up, he's really big. Max is naturally quite friendly, he's chatty. So part of his experience in the world, you would expect him to do certain things, but forgetting that he's still in his adolescent brain. So it's almost like they're showing up as kind of mini adults, and you have an expectation that they should be able to do X, Y, and Z, but they can't. And the simple fact is because of brain development, like their brain hasn't developed to that capacity yet. And I think as parents we kind of forget that. Like I know growing up, a saying in my house was you're big enough and ugly enough to do it. Like whereas we forget that they're not able to do certain things because of where they're at developmentally.
Yeah. And the adult brain doesn't finish developing till 25, isn't it?
Yeah, like there's different studies, like they reckon somewhere between like 24 and 28 is when your brain, like, so your brain's by the age of 6, it's 90 to 95% fully grown. But it's when you hit adolescence that it starts to come online and to grow and develop. So adolescence is a time where, apart from being a baby, that we'll experience the most growth in terms of brain development, which is why, and this has helped me loads. So for anybody out there listening, adolescents need lots of sleep. And I know for me that's really helped me, because I would see my adolescent lying in bed and I'd be like, you know, my head be like The Exorcist, and I'd be doing like me ma nearly going in and opening the windows. You're not staying in bed in a lovely day like today. And it's like, oh my God, I've turned into me ma. And I think for me, knowing that is like, okay, she needs extra sleep. They need extra sleep. And also they're probably up later on the phone, which means they're going to sleep later in the day. I'm not saying that's right. I'm just saying that that's what happens.
And you've recently opened your own business.
Yeah.
And how are you finding that?
Really scary. I guess, again, looking at my adolescence, like I never would have in my wildest dreams thought I would have my own business. My own adolescent experience, I would have had suicidal thoughts. I would have been really insecure. Was in like shitty relationships. And when I was 25, I think I went to therapy, and it was the first time somebody had actually validated me, saying, have you ever thought about being a therapist? And I was like, oh, delighted with my life. So from my adolescence till now, never would have thought I could have my own business. And yeah, it's actually going really well, which is great.
Excellent. That's great news. And has COVID affected it, or how is that working now?
again, yes and no. Like, I think for me, sitting face to face with someone is great. I love that part of therapy. But obviously with COVID, people couldn't leave their house. So I was doing some online therapy. Some of it was okay, some of it wasn't. I think with younger adolescents, like, it was very difficult for them because I'm quite creative in the room and I would use lots of things. And this staring at them as well, like, I think some of them found it like quite exposing. But I've noticed a big surge in people seeking therapy, like, kind of after COVID. So it's definitely had an impact. Like, people who are experiencing anxiety and stuff found that they actually weren't that anxious during COVID because they didn't really have to go anywhere or doing anything. So a lot of the times, if you're anxious in the world, having to do daily tasks is like really, really difficult. So in COVID, there was no expectation on anyone to leave the house, to go to school, to work. So a lot of people's anxiety really kind of plateaued, which was great. But now that things are starting to come back, I'm finding that I'm getting a lot of calls from parents just worried, like they seem to be going backwards is what they'd say, or I'm worried about my adolescent and school is kind of coming up, and then you have the predictive grades with the leaving cert and they're worried about, are they going to get the course? So there's all of this kind of energy around them at the moment that I'm finding that because of COVID, there's definitely an increase in the number of people seeking therapy.
And anxiety seems to be a huge issue for adolescents. Like, they're uncertain about the future, and I suppose with social media and then their group of friends and where they fit in, an adolescent is normally kind of awkward anyway. But with all this stuff, it just like magnifies it for them, you know. For a bit of advice for parents that their kid is maybe a bit anxious about going to school or anxious about their group or whatever, what kind of advice would you give to them?
So I think with anxiety, I guess with all stuff, it's a creative adjustment to something else that's happening in your life space. So these are probably words people don't understand. So your life space is everything that's happening for you. And I think with anxiety, for young people, it can come from all different places. So it could be like a kid might have birth trauma. There might have been an accident in the family. There could be a sibling who was sick. So anxiety can show up at any stage. The advice that I would give to parents is to get help. You can't manage it on your own as much as you want to. And I think as parents, we have this kind of onus on ourselves that we think we should be able to know what to do. They're our children, but in every other area of life, we get help. We get help even giving birth to them. We don't do it on our own. We get help from family and friends. So with anxiety, I think with parents, if you don't have any understanding of anxiety, you can be quite get up and get on with it. And I think that's how I would have been brought up. It's like, just get up and get on with it. But if you have no understanding of that, you actually can't get up and get on with it as much as you want to. I think being understanding of the person and realising that they're not doing this on purpose. It's horrible to experience anxiety. It's quite debilitating. I would say for parents is to get some help and support around it, or even talk to somebody. They might have a friend whose kid has anxiety. It's like, what's your experience like in the world? But then again, I think with social media, people don't really portray that anything's wrong. Everything's grand and everything's perfect. And as parents, it can make us feel really inadequate. But definitely seek support. Try and be as understanding as you can with the young person. I think as parents, we go into two modes. It's been really understanding, and it's like, oh, and then when they're not moving, it's like, right, that's it now. Like, sort your shit out. This can't go on any longer. So get some support. Read up about anxiety. Try and be as understanding as you can to the young person. Again, like, they're not doing this on purpose, and there's probably a reason for it. It's a creative adjustment to something else that's going on, as I said, in your life space, if that makes sense.
And I suppose, like, bringing it back to when I was that age, like, my large group of friends, like, looking back now with an adult head on me now, but compared to at the time, when I seen a good few of them that were suffering, like, at the time, you wouldn't realise it, but some type of trauma or death, and an alcoholic parent or a drug addict parent, and how it affected them and how they coped with it. Mostly how they coped with it was like abusing alcohol or drugs, the option of, and I'm a big believer in therapy, you know what I mean? and it's a better option than trying to cope with a problem with alcohol and drugs, you know.
But like when you think about it at that age, like you've talked about this actually a lot on other podcasts about being part of a tribe and being accepted. And I think for adolescents, like friends are like so important.
Yeah.
Like all you want is to be part of this tribe. And I think for parents, it's to really honour that they have these friendships. And you might not always agree with their friends, but it's really important that they have this, you know, sense of belonging and a place to be. But if you can imagine being an adolescent and not being able to manage all of these feelings, like they're really overwhelming and you're like, I can't tolerate this, and nobody's really talking about it and you don't know what it is, it kind of makes sense when you think of it like, if I have this drink or if I take this drug, I'm not going to feel like this. You know, it's going to take away momentarily, like the next day, like your head's wrecked and it kind of the cycle continues. But adolescents are just trying to adjust to what's going on in their life, and that's why they behave in certain ways.
No, I'm a huge, and even me at the moment, like I need a belonging. You know, I'm a huge believer in my belonging is jiu-jitsu. You know what I mean? And it's important. I think kids, and most kids do have their place, like with their friends, as you just said, and maybe the parents don't see, but it's that is almost primal if we drag it back and you're looking at it. What was that? She done Gorillas in the Mist. Diane, was her name Diane Fossey? She spoke about chimpanzee groups. Mm-hmm. For instance, if you have a group of chimpanzees and you'll have a member that was originally a member of that chimpanzee troop and they're an interloper, so they move off to another different tribe, a different group. You can have chimpanzees from the original group that are kind of half related to that other chimpanzee, but when they're patrolling their territory, if they come across it, they'll attack it, kill it, and eat it. So it's kind of like a teenager with a group of friends. That is their everything. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? And I kind of have an understanding now. I'm a bit older, but when I pull it back to my teenage years, like my 10 friends were, they're the be all and end all. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? There's nothing more important than that. So we kind of have to understand
and
that.
I think if you were to unpack it, like if you were to look at them 10 friends, I think there was probably 12 or 15 in their group, but every one of them was experiencing something.
Yes.
Didn't really have the language on how to express that, but we all came together as this collective group and we knew each other and we had our own slang and our own sayings. And it was when we were in that group, the shit that was happening at home or with your parents or whatever was going on didn't happen within this group because you had your sense of belonging, like you were in this group, and that's all that mattered. And I think as adolescents, and for all of us even now, like that's really important. Like you talk about it with jits, other people might get it from swimming in the sea. I know for me, I think I found my sense of belonging, or Dennis that was on was talking about your sense of purpose, and I think for me I found that with studying. It's like, oh, okay, I kind of feel like I fit here, whereas before I was kind of floating, you know, anchorless, going, what's my purpose? And I think it's so important for us all to have a sense of belonging and to find that purpose, because it can really make it a difference. If you're having a shit day, like you might, you know, go and have a roll. I think that's the correct terminology.
Yeah.
But for me, like I'll pick up a book, or I'll, you know, listen to a podcast about stuff that I'm interested in and that kind of lands, you know, it lands with me. And I think for all of us, it's really important to have that, not just adolescents, all of us.
And I would have read other books as well about like football hooligans, and you can apply that to drug dealing gangs in Dublin at the moment. The crime war between them different gangs at the moment. It's like in hooligan, they were called Zulus. They were a group in Birmingham, and they were made up mostly of Irish immigrant kids or black kids. So this was the first kind of group that had people, black people in it and Irish people in it, of mixed race, mostly were kind of right wing. And the reason why these all gelled together is they were immigrants. they're in a community that everyone else didn't really like them. Do you know what I mean? Because they were immigrants, and they banded together from all different areas, working class, middle class, everywhere, to support this team and kind of fight together. And there's other hooligan elements like that, and also with the criminal fraternity that's around the world, it's like people find a place in this group. They find their belonging, plus they knock out a few quid or whatever. So,
but I think it doesn't really matter what the context is within the group. It's what that group gives you. So it might be drug dealing, it might be hooliganism, it might be rugby, football, jits. Everybody is getting the same thing from that, and that's, I belong here.
yes.
And I think that's primal in us. Like, I want to belong, I need to belong to something. So it doesn't really matter. And I'm not saying I agree with criminality or anything but it's not about what they're doing. It's about the feeling that they're getting from that group. It's like, somebody sees me, I belong here, and I have a place. And for all of us, that's just what we want. That's what it boils down to, is having a place to belong.
Yeah. And it's I suppose my message of this podcast, or any podcast, they have a similar vein towards them. Like, I'm always, that's the agenda I push, not for just jiu-jitsu, but like Philly McMahon with GAA, you know what I mean? Me with jiu-jitsu, Gary Rooney with jiu-jitsu. Like, we're all these people just ambling around in society, and all of us can go one or the other way. Speaking for myself, like I went the okay route, but I could have very easily went the other route. Friends of mine went the other route. I didn't, but it's, I suppose, if anything from this podcast, to push that agenda, to try and find, and I encourage young fellas to do jiu-jitsu, or encourage them to go to Roddy's, or wherever they can, because there is these other groups. My outflow always used to say, like, the street, if the street is waiting for you. Do you know what I mean? These people on the street, and I suppose, like, you are lucky, but sometimes people haven't got that guidance, and the street does take them. Do you know what I mean?
And I hear you were talking about, like, from a male perspective. I think me from a female perspective, is that, like, growing up in Mofew, there was really, I felt, and I'm not saying anything about Mofew, like, there's some really, really amazing people in it, and I'm really proud that I come from there. But that as a woman, like, I didn't feel there was many options for me. I felt like, you kind of got a fella and you had a kid, which is what I did. And I became a single mother, which was something that I never wanted to be, because I seen the struggle of my own mum. And I think for me, what saved me was actually going to therapy. Going through a really, like, difficult breakup was what landed me in therapy in the first place. Being a single parent, having, as one of my mass friends would say, haven't got an arse in my trousers, like, had no money, went on social welfare, was kind of homeless for a while, like sofa surfing between me ma and me sisters, and I felt like there was no really place for me. Like, what do I do? Like, I'm not smart enough to do anything else. I don't have any skills to get a job in order to pay rent, to afford childcare. So I felt very much trapped in this cycle of, being a lone parent, being on social welfare. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. It's just, for me, I felt very trapped, and it was like, there has to be more. And for me, I only found a way out of that through therapy and working really, really hard. Like, it wasn't an easy road to take, because you have to look at yourself. And I guess you're talking from a male perspective. Like, from a female perspective, that's kind of how I suppose, went on this journey, was through counselling and studying.
And all the way to a master's.
Yeah.
A master's.
Yeah.
And it's like, Yvonne is always really proud of that when she says, "Here's Jenny with her master's." Remember when you got your master's?
And I suppose I'll give Yvonne a shout out, because me and Yvonne are friends since we're 12, which is bizarre. So nearly 30 years, and me and her would have been quite, I guess, similar in school. We kind of different stuff going on. I had a lot of stuff going on at home, and I think there was definitely a part of my brain that was probably switched off, because I was dealing with shit that was happening at home and my own stuff. So I think for her, when I got my master's, it was almost like, if Jenny can do it, maybe like there's a chance that I can do it. And I hope that if there's anybody watching this that looks at me and remembers me from being a mental teenager or feeling like, you know, that they can't do it. Like, I'm from Mofew. I came up as a single parent and I worked me arse off, and yeah, I do have a master's, which is great. But yeah, it's just about kind of hanging on in there and sticking with it. Sitting with the uncomfortable, which is what I'm doing today.
That's it. I want the attention on everyone else from that, me.
Yeah, Scarlett.
Good stuff. And your business, like it's in Blanchardstown Village.
Yep.
It's called
Oak Psychotherapy. So I have an Instagram page, and if you want, you can put it up after this. I see adolescents from age 13 upwards. I also see adult clients. I do parenting sessions with parents because I think that's really important a lot of the times in therapy. And I know from other models, it's like you send the kid in and the parents left outside. And I don't think that works. I know for me, if it was my daughter, I'd be nearly listening at the door, wanting to know. Like, I think we all love our kids and we want to know what's going on for them. So I like to work like collaboratively with parents, and it's like, okay, like, what's going on here? Let's have a chat, see what's happening. And get like support for the parents as well as the young person.
Yeah. I remember when my niece's dad died and my auntie was getting her to go to counselling, bereavement counselling and stuff. And I remember thinking back at the time, like, wow, that's mad. And now I understand it. Do you know what I mean? We didn't, as you said, what? I wish I had, like, my mom when you were growing up, I wish I had 45 minutes to talk about myself. You know, they were a different generation. Do you know what I mean? But I'm a full believer in people going to therapy and counselling, and 100% believer in that. And so they can hit you up on Instagram, and have you a website?
I do. It's www.oakpsychotherapy.ie.
Whopper. We're going to end it now.
Okay.
So we'll put the link up. We'll put your Instagram up on the page. And Jenni Loftus, Dublin 17's finest, with a master's degree.
Thanks a million, John.
No worries. That's it from this week's episode. Yuuupp.